Next on the news, the first of thousands of mourners file into St. Peter's Basilica to pay their respects to Pope Francis, who will lie in state for 3 days.
Pope Francis touched the hearts of so many Catholics, but his passing also affected people outside of the faith. I'm Katie Vasquez, and I'll talk to a Jewish couple who call the Holy Father a friend.
And how Pope Francis connected with the faithful when COVID spread fear around the globe. Plus, St. John students get creative to commemorate Pope Francis. I'm Christine Persichetti. Currents News starts right now. Applause and the toll of bells fill the Vatican's main piazza for the People's Pope. Now, tens of thousands are slowly making their way inside St. Peter's Basilica as public viewings of the Holy Father begin. Pope Francis will lie in state for the 3 days leading up to his funeral. In the first few hours alone, the overwhelming number of mourners lining up in St. Peter's Square to bid farewell to the pontiff has grown so large, the Vatican may extend the viewing hours to accommodate the faithful. These Catholics say it was an opportunity they couldn't miss. The Pope's singular open wooden casket, reverent in its simplicity, upon the grand altar of St. Peter's Basilica. For hours on Wednesday, somber hymns and music filled the air, mixed with the quiet steps and hushed final respects from thousands of mourners passing by.
He was the Pope of the people.
Outside, long lines crisscross St. Peter's Square, at one point stretching beyond the walls of Vatican City.
The line is rather intimidating, so I'm not sure if we'll have a chance to get in today.
The Pope's body will lie in state for public viewing until his funeral Saturday. Many coming to see him were in Rome by chance, on vacation or a business trip. His popularity propelling them to join the masses in St. Peter's Square.
We are not Christian actually, but I feel in deep, because the Pope is very friendly.
Trying to unify and accepting different religions, races, and genders, and just inclusivity.
Inclusivity. It's what many say they remember most about Pope Francis.
His legacy will be to feed the poor, the outcast, the downtrodden, but also to just be with everyone.
And when the cardinals choose the Pope's successor in the coming weeks, most mourners hope those values will endure.
We want a Pope who will stand for the truth, to unite everyone, poor, rich, black, white, and all sorts of people, even believers and non-believers.
Some mourners have already waited 5 hours to get into St. Peter's Basilica and say their goodbyes to Pope Francis. Tens of thousands are currently in line to see the Holy Father. In the past, more than 2 million people waited to see Pope John Paul II in 2005, and 200,000 saw Pope Benedict XVI in 2023. As the people of faith prepare for the Holy Father's funeral, many are remembering the iconic moments of the Francis papacy. Shortly after hearing about his passing, Brooklyn Bishop Robert Brennan spoke about what he says was one of the Holy Father's most unforgettable moments, when Pope Francis gave an Urbi et Orbi blessing at the beginning of the pandemic.
He led the whole world in prayer for an end to the pandemic. And that image of him has always stayed with me because it showed a very strong arm of leadership, of confident leadership, but at the same time, a tenderness. Showed a certain tenderness. And the more I think about it, those images really marked his pontificate. A strength of leadership, but a tenderness. And I use that word tenderness deliberately because it's a word that he used very often.
As we continue to remember the legacy of Pope Francis, let's take a look back at that special pandemic message delivered 5 years ago. It was a stunning sight, Pope Francis walking through an empty St. Peter's Square. It was March 27, 2020, just 2 weeks after the coronavirus was declared a global pandemic, when the Holy Father made history at the Vatican. giving an Urbi et Orbi blessing while standing alone in this iconic square as the faithful took part virtually. This blessing is usually reserved for special occasions like Easter, Christmas, and the election of a new pope. But an exception was made on this day as Pope Francis led an extraordinary moment of prayer, praying for an end to the coronavirus.
Abbiamo proseguito imperterriti, pensando di rimanere sempre sani in un mondo malato. Ora, mentre stiamo in mare agitato, ti imploriamo. Svegliati, Signore.
The stunning gesture from the Pope during a time of uncertainty and fear across the globe was a way for the Holy Father to connect with the faithful spiritually, despite the quarantine, church closures, and lack of sacraments. Pope Francis closely watched as the pandemic developed. Italy was one of the countries hardest hit, with nearly 1,000 deaths every day. Just days before this special blessing, an Italian priest living in the same guest house that Pope Francis called home tested positive for the virus. During daily masses, the Pope prayed for people living in fear.
Preghiamo oggi per tanta gente che non riesce a reagire e rimane spaventata per questa pandemia. Che il Signore li aiuti a alzarsi, a reagire per il bene di tutta la società, di tutta la comunità.
And each day he would pray for a different group, from the sick to those caring for them, journalists covering the pandemic, and people living on the streets.
Preghiamo oggi per coloro che sono senza fissa dimora in questo momento dove ci chiede di essere dentro casa.
But the Pope didn't just offer prayers during the pandemic. He jumped into action. He sent desperately needed ventilators to hospitals in Italy and set up an emergency fund to help those suffering from the pandemic. The Holy Father was the first to contribute, making a $750,000 donation. Pope Francis also encouraged the faithful to get the vaccine, calling it an ethical duty. And he led by example, as both he and Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI were vaccinated. The Pope even took part in a video campaign urging people to protect themselves as an act of love for others.
Vacunarse es un modo sencillo pero profundo de promover el bien común y de cuidarnos unos a otros, especialmente los más vulnerables. Le pido a Dios para que cada uno pueda aportar su pequeño grano de arena.
More than 11 million people tuned in to watch the papal prayer during the pandemic. The Diocese of Brooklyn will hold a memorial mass for Pope Francis this Friday, April 25th at 6:30 p.m. at St. Bartholomew's Church in Elmhurst. That's at 43-22 Ithaca Street. Bishop Brennan will be the main celebrant. Be sure to tune in this Saturday to Currents News as the world says goodbye to Pope Francis for the last time at his funeral mass in St. Peter's Square. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, will preside over the service, which will be attended by presidents, prime ministers, royalty, and clergy from around the world. Currents News will be covering the historic funeral of Pope Francis live with Melissa Corsi in Rome for the Mass. That'll be this Saturday, April 26th at 4 a.m. Eastern. You can read more about the funeral arrangements and burial of Pope Francis online at thetablet.org. While many cardinals will be in Rome to say goodbye to Pope Francis, they will stay in the Eternal City after his funeral to help elect the next pontiff. That conclave will take place about 15 to 20 days after his death. And while the Red Hats will take an oath of secrecy before they are sealed inside the doors of the Sistine Chapel, many are already speculating who the princes of the Catholic Church will cast their votes for. Some of the big names that are being talked about include the Vatican Secretary of State, Italian Cardinal Pietro Parolin. Next is Filipino Cardinal Luis Tagle. He leads the Vatican's dicastery for evangelization. Cardinal Peter Turkson from Ghana, who is the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academies of Sciences. Cardinal Peter Urdo, who is the Primate of Hungary and Archbishop of Budapest. And finally, Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, President of the Italian Episcopal Conference and Archbishop of Bologna. Currently, there are 135 cardinals who will be able to vote in the next conclave, though 2 have decided not to take part due to health reasons. Among the electors, the number of European red hats is 53. The number of Asian electors is 23. Africa, 18. North America will have 16. South America, 17. Central America, 4. And Oceania, 4. A Diocese of Brooklyn priest who was in Rome when Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio was elected pope was unexpectedly in the Eternal City again following the death of Pope Francis. Diocese of Brooklyn Chancellor Monsignor Stephen Aguja spoke to Currents News shortly after landing on Easter Monday and talked about the sadness and the excitement of this period of transition.
There's always something very special about the transition period because there's a sort of a sense of excitement during the conclave and everybody wondering who will be the next pope. But at this point now, everybody is still mourning the loss of a pope whom they truly loved because he was a pope of the people. He really reached out to ordinary people and they felt attracted to him. So there is a sense of mourning now, but that mourning, I feel, will kind of change after the funeral into a certain sense of excitement and anticipation as the cardinals gather for their conclave later on.
Monsignor Aguja also got the chance to meet Pope Francis. He called it an awe-inspiring experience. That's also how a Jewish couple from Long Island described their meetings with Pope Francis. Gary and Meredith Krupp run a foundation that brings different faiths together. They met the Pope 5 times and say they love how the Holy Father embraced everyone. Currents News' Katie Vasquez spoke with them at their home in Wantagh.
So what are all these documents?
Okay, that's the papal decree.
The Krupps' Long Island home is filled with photos and memories of their many trips to Vatican City.
This is the papal decree from Pope Francis.
But Gary and Meredith are not Catholic, they're Jewish, founders of Pave the Way Foundation, a nonprofit that helps bring different faiths together.
We don't deal with theology, we deal with the practical aspects. I told him as a reward.
Not many people can say the Pope is a personal friend, and the loss of Pope Francis was devastating for the pair.
It was very, very sad, and it's the 3rd time it's happened to me. These people, I knew 3 of them.
He loved the people, and he loved the children. And it was always one of our pleasures to be able to meet him and shake his hand.
In fact, they're the only Jewish couple in the history of the Catholic Church to be knighted by the Pope.
He actually knighted me, which makes me the first Jewish woman in history to be knighted by the Pope to a particular order. And I am very blessed about that, too.
Only the Pope can do this. And the fact that Mary received this was extremely wonderful.
I'm giving him the zucchetta.
But they still have a piece of the Holy Father in their home.
I greeted him, handed him this new one. He took it, kind of went like that to it, took his off that he was wearing, gave that one to me, and he put mine on.
The Krupps visited Rome recently, but weren't able to meet with Pope Francis because he was sick. Now they're mourning like the rest of the world.
He was a very a sweet, kind man. It's always been it's a blessing for us.
He cared for the people. It's going to be a loss for the church.
In Wantagh, Long Island, Katie Vasquez, Currents News.
Pope Francis also had a profound impact on young people, and the students of St. John's University are remembering the Holy Father on their Queens campus. Each Johnny was given a 3x3 tile to replicate a specific design that altogether made a mosaic of the Holy Father. No experience was required to take part in the pop-up art studio. Instead, students were allowed to sit, paint, and engage in healing and joyous dialogue, allowing them to mourn and honor the people's Pope. Beautiful. That is this Currents News Update. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. We once again join the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in praying a novena for Pope Francis. On this day, we remember the Holy Father as the successor of St. Peter.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
A shepherd of service, a champion of compassion, the people's pope.
His leadership, for his strength of leadership and his tenderness.
Today we pause to pray for the Holy Father.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei.
A pope of firsts, the first Latin American pontiff, the first Jesuit leader of the Catholic Church, and the first to call himself Francis.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
We are looking back at the Francis effect, a pontificate that touched the peripheries and changed the world, one heart at a time. This Friday on Currents News, a look at the legacy of Pope Francis.